There is a motorcycle for sale right now, somewhere within driving distance of you, with an 1800 cubic centimeter V-twin, shaft final drive, liquid cooling, and about $4,500 on the price tag. It is a Honda VTX 1800, 15 or so years old, probably one owner, probably barely ridden, and a substantial number of riders will tell you not to buy it. Not because it is unreliable, not because it is slow, because of what it is not. That is the argument this video is about, and I want to make it properly, which means giving both sides their strongest version, not the version that is easiest to knock down. Start with what the used market actually shows. Look at current listings for a Honda VTX 1800, and you will find them running from roughly $3,900 to around $6,000, with the average sitting near $4,500. Yamaha V-Stars land in similar territory, roughly $2,500 to $6,000, averaging around $4,100. For that money, you are buying a large capacity V-twin cruiser from a manufacturer with a reputation for building engines that outlast their owner's interest in them. Now compare how the two families depreciate, because this is where the argument really lives. A new Harley-Davidson typically loses somewhere between 15 and 25% in its first year, and real-world resale often lands 30 to 50% down within 3 years. That sounds severe until you set it against the category. Motorcycles in general retain roughly 50 to 65% of value after 3 years and 35 to 50% after 5. And within that, Harley-Davidson holds value better than most cruiser brands. Japanese cruisers do not. Owners of the VTX in particular are blunt about it. Go into any owner's forum and you will find resale described in language I am not going to repeat here. So the first honest statement is this: the reason a Japanese cruiser is cheap to buy is exactly the reason it is painful to sell. If you are the buyer, that is a gift. Somebody else has already absorbed the loss. You are stepping into a large motorcycle at a price that has already fallen as far as it is going to fall, which means your own depreciation from here is close to flat. If you are the seller, it is a bill. That is not an opinion about brands. It is the same number viewed from two ends. Now the engineering, because this is where the Japanese machines have arguments that do not depend on taste at all. Take the Suzuki Boulevard C50. 805 cubic centimetres, V-twin, 5 speeds, and two details that matter more than the numbers. It is liquid cooled, and it drives the rear wheel through a shaft. The Honda Shadow VT750 and the Yamaha V-Star 1100 also use shaft drive. Consider what shaft drive removes from your life. No chain to clean, no chain to lubricate, no sprockets wearing into hooks, no adjusting slack, and therefore no chance of over-tightening it and quietly destroying a countershaft bearing, which is one of the most common self-inflicted injuries in motorcycling. A shaft is heavier. It costs you a small amount of power. It is more expensive to fix in the rare event that it fails. And in exchange, it asks you for an oil change in the final drive at long intervals and then leaves you alone for years. Liquid cooling is the second one. An air-cooled engine's temperature depends on how fast air is moving over it, which means it depends on traffic. Sit in July gridlock on an air-cooled V-twin, and the engine gets hot, the oil gets hot, and your right leg gets hot. A liquid-cooled engine holds a temperature the thermostat shows, regardless of whether you are moving. For a rider who commutes, or who rides in a hot climate, or who is honest about the fact that a significant part of their riding is not open road, that is not a specification. It is the difference between enjoying the bike and enduring it. There is a second consequence of liquid cooling that gets discussed less, and it matters over a decade rather than over an afternoon. An engine that runs at a controlled temperature has a controlled rate of wear. Oil that never gets cooked keeps doing its job. Clearances that stay where the designer put them do not open up. None of that is dramatic, and none of it shows up in a road test. It shows up at 120,000 kilometers in whether the engine still holds its oil pressure. That is the real reason these machines turn up cheap with high mileage and no drama. It is not that Japanese factories used magic metal. It is that they removed several of the ways an owner can accidentally destroy an engine, and then sold the result to people who were not paying attention to any of it. Which brings up the third thing, and it is the one most likely to matter to somebody watching this who is thinking about a first big cruiser. These bikes forgive mistakes. Not all mistakes, but the common ones. The service that went 1,000 kilometers over, the winter it sat with a battery going flat, the wash that got water where it should not have been. A shaft does not care that you forgot it exists. A liquid-cooled engine does not care that you sat in traffic for 40 minutes. A big, under-stressed V-twin turning modest revolutions for its displacement does not care that the oil is a little older than the book says. Buy a machine that is highly tuned, air-cooled and chain-driven, and every one of those lapses costs you something. Buy one of these, and most of them cost you nothing at all. That tolerance is worth real money to a rider who is honest about how much maintenance they actually do, as opposed to how much they intend to do. If you find yourself more interested in what a machine actually does than in what it signals, subscribe. That is the whole pitch. So far, this sounds one-sided. It is not, and here is where the argument turns. The first thing Harley genuinely does better is the thing we just used against it: value retention. If you buy new and sell within a few years, the Harley will cost you less to own than the depreciation figures alone suggest. The Japanese cruiser is cheap because it fell. The Harley is expensive because it did not. The second is parts. Harley-Davidson has been building broadly similar machines for a very long time, in enormous numbers, with an aftermarket industry built around them. Almost anything you need exists in several versions, at several prices, from several suppliers today. Now try to buy a specific body panel for a 15-year-old Japanese cruiser that was sold for 4 seasons and then discontinued. It may exist. It may exist in the wrong country. It may exist only on a bike being broken for parts 3 states away. This is the quiet cost of the bargain, and it does not appear anywhere in the purchase price. A cheap motorcycle that you cannot get a part for is not cheap. It is a project. The third is the dealer network, which matters more than enthusiasts like to admit. Break down 400 miles from home on a Harley, and you are usually within reach of somebody who has seen your machine before. On a discontinued Japanese cruiser, you are within reach of somebody who will have to order. The fourth is the part that gets mocked and should not be, because it is real, the community. A motorcycle is not only transport. For a lot of riders, it is the reason they have friends they would not otherwise have, and rides they would not otherwise take. Harley has built that deliberately over decades, and no specification sheet competes with it. And there is a fifth, which almost nobody mentions until it is too late. A Harley is easy to sell. Not just for a good price. Easy. Put one up for sale, and people come and look at it, because they already know what it is and roughly what it should cost. Put up a 15-year-old Japanese cruiser, and you may be waiting weeks, fielding lowball offers from people who have never heard of the model, explaining what a VTX is. That is a real cost, paid in time rather than money, and it lands at exactly the moment you least want it, when you have already decided to move on. So the bargain has 3 prices attached to it. The one on the tag, which is low. The one for parts, which is unpredictable. And the one you pay to get out again, which is the highest of the 3 and the one nobody thinks about while they are buying. So where does that leave the actual decision? Strip away the tribalism, and the honest version is narrower than either camp wants. If you are buying used, riding a lot, doing your own maintenance, and you would rather spend money on tires and trips than on a badge, the Japanese cruiser is very hard to argue against. You get a large, smooth, liquid-cooled engine with shaft drive for the price of a decent used car, and the depreciation has already happened to somebody else. If you are buying new, keeping it for a few years, riding with a group, and you want a machine you can walk into any dealer with, the Harley makes financial sense in a way that surprises people who only look at the sticker. And if you are choosing a motorcycle to spend Sunday mornings with, the whole analysis collapses anyway, because that decision was never going to be made on drivetrain architecture. There is one more thing worth saying, and it cuts against the premise of this video's own title. The hostility between these two camps is mostly not about motorcycles. Nobody who has actually ridden a VTX 1800 thinks it is a bad machine. Nobody who has ridden a Road King thinks it is a bad machine. The argument is about what each one says about the person on it. And that is an argument nobody wins, because it was never about the engineering in the first place. What is true is this: the Japanese factories built cruisers that are, on several measurable points, easier to live with. Liquid cooling that does not care about traffic, shaft drive that does not care about your maintenance schedule, and engines with a reputation for tolerating neglect that would kill something more highly strung. And the market punished them for it, because the people buying cruisers were not, in the main, buying on measurable points. That is the brutal truth, and it is brutal in both directions. The Japanese machines deserved better than the resale values they got. And the reason they did not get it is the same reason their owners keep finding 1800cc motorcycles for $4,500. You cannot have both. Either the market values what you are buying, in which case you pay for it, or it does not, in which case you get a bargain and eat the loss on the way out. Pick which side of that you would rather be on. That is the entire decision, and everything else is a flag on a tank.